Coming up on this episode of Discover Health Podcast.
Picky eating is a symptom, not a diagnosis. It's a symptom of something else going on in the body. When you notice these behavioral changes and you notice these patterns that are kind of occurring all the time in terms of their health or in terms of these struggles, those are not going to just kind of resolve on their own. We have to help them to get better, whether it's a microbiome, a leaky gut imbalance, whether it's skills that are causing this. Those things are typically not going to resolve on their own.
Welcome to the Discover Health Podcast, where we explore the power of gut health, nutrition, and lifestyle to help you feel your best every day. I'm Dr. Josh Sharp, your guide on this journey to better digestion, more energy, and overall well-being. Ready to start discovering? Let's hit the trail. Welcome back to another episode of Discover Health Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Joshua Sharp, and joining me today is Lena Livinsky. She's a mom, she's a pediatric speech language pathologist, and she's a holistic feeding specialist. Now, I had a family member who I thought was a holistic feeding specialist. At Thanksgiving time, he was always giving advice on how to get the most whole food in your mouth at a time. But then I learned what a holistic feeding specialist actually is, and I realized I was mistaken. So she's a real holistic feeding specialist, and she helps families move beyond picky eating using root cause nervous system informed approaches. She blends gut health, ancestral style nutrition, and lifestyle shifts to empower parents to reclaim their children's health naturally and bring more peace to meal times. Lena, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.
I'm so excited for this topic. I can't wait to get into it because I think it's such an interesting topic. And I think the listeners that we have are going to be so excited to learn more about how to understand picky eating, the whys, and you'll give them some insights, I'm sure, on what things they can look for and try to work on this issue. But before we get into that, I want to know a little bit more about what is a feeding specialist for real, a real feeding specialist. And I want to know, how did you first get interested in helping families that have picky eaters?
Yeah. So a feeding specialist is a person who can help your child become more of a curious eater. At least that's what I like to think a feeding specialist is, so that they're not so picky. Food is not stressful, doesn't cause them anxiety, and it doesn't disrupt kind of the household, because that happens sometimes with picky eating, because then mom has to think about, oh, now I have to make, let's call him Joey, a separate dinner, or he only eats chicken nuggets. He will not touch this. And there's just stress that naturally occurs in the home because of it. So a feeding specialist is somebody who can help you not have to do that, not have to make any special meals, and help your child to be excited about food and to eat it safely. And due to my background as a speech language pathologist, feeding is part of something that we help children with. However, what I do now, though, is working mostly with parents versus doing therapy with the children. But that's what I did for over 10 years. So that gave me a lot of insight of how to work with kids, and it was a great learning lesson for me. But what I did realize, though, that the behavioral approach that I learned in school and I learned through work as well, which is typically what we do as speech language pathologists, kind of working on expanding on the bites and maybe trying different textures and working on that behavior aspect of feeding is what I learned through my own personal experiences with health and through my child who is picky, is that they don't really work. So that's when I looked into this holistic aspect of feeding, and I started to look into this root cause approach, or root causes, that has been very transformative for my family, me, and for many other parents that I have worked with since.
I love that. I love that you have seen this issue that is so common, but so often it is very misunderstood as, well, this is just
Mm-hmm.
purely a behavioral thing. This is just a
Mm-hmm.
battle of wills. He just
Yes.
needs to sit there at the dinner table, or she just needs to sit there at the dinner table until they finish, whatever's on the plate,
Mhm.
I know I had to I had to do that as a kid. I don't know
Yeah.
how long I actually sat there as a kid. It probably felt like hours. I have no idea how long it actually was, but um, you're. I love that you saw an issue and you tried to look at it from different angles, and attacking things from a holistic approach. Now, I
Yeah.
know, looking at your backstory, that you've walked through some postpartum struggles, mold toxicity, some chronic gut issues of your own before finding relief with some changes in your life. So,
Mhm.
for the mom who's listening who feels like, okay, I've already tried everything,
Yeah.
what were some of the key turning points that actually started to move the needle for you personally?
Well, I definitely was that mom because no matter what I did, I feel like I couldn't get better. I couldn't feel better. So I was holding on to like 50 pounds of weight that I just couldn't let go of after I had my son. I had so many different symptoms after I was exposed to mold as well, and that was just through this place I stayed at an Airbnb where I stayed for a few days. And I think because I already had autoimmune issues and nutritional deficiencies and things that I was dealing with that were not properly addressed, I was so susceptible to mold toxicity in that moment that it really made me struggle with my health. And I feel like though it was kind of a positive thing in a way though, because I feel like I hit rock bottom in my health and I really needed to get to what was really happening because I've struggled with psoriasis since I was 8 years old and I've always had this like autoimmune issue going on in the background that I just couldn't really understand. And I tried many different ways of healing. That included the vegan diet, which unfortunately for me, that was not the right choice. It actually made things much, much, much worse for me. Then I tried the medical medium diet. I did the bean protocol. I feel like have always been trying so hard to find the answer of how I get better, working with doctors and then testing. And I just wasn't getting any answers. And then when I had that mold exposure and I started developing these very severe symptoms where I really thought, maybe I have cancer at this point because it was just so severe that I didn't know what was going on. And then I did the mycotoxin test. So to clarify, which I know it's not 100%, but it definitely showed a lot of elevated levels of mycotoxins in my system. And also the symptoms, everything added up. And I knew that this was exactly where it came from, that moldy house, because the symptoms started when I was still there on the third night. I remember laying in bed in that Airbnb and my head was spinning. And I was like, well, this is weird. It's like late at night. I'm just resting. This has never happened to me before. And like when I came home, everything started to shift very negatively for a few months. But I say it was kind of a blessing in disguise because I feel like I hit such rock bottom that I just needed to do something. And that's when I started to look for answers again because everything I've learned in the past did not help me. So I was kind of, you know, not really excited about digging into this again. But what I have learned from then was things about circadian rhythm and light environment and the sun. And I started to look into gut health, and really things that shifted the needle for me so much. So first I started to work on my light environment. I started to change the lighting in my house. I started to go outside a lot more, trying to get UVA light, UVB light, red, infrared light on my skin as much as I could. And those things were already really helping me. And then what I also did is I went on the GAPS diet. So the GAPS diet is it's a diet that really focuses a lot. It's a gut healing diet. It's a gut and psychology syndrome diet. So it's supposed to help you heal your gut. And what it does, it incorporates a lot of animal foods, as well as some vegetables and fruits. But a lot of the basis of the GAPS diet is the meat stock, the meat soup, which is how I started this diet. So I stayed on it for a month and my health, not only did I lose a ton of weight, which no matter what I did before, it just wouldn't come off. And it was for years and years, it wouldn't come off. So then I started that and things started to shift. My mood started to lift because I was still dealing with some postpartum depression stuff. I feel like I started to have emotions again, where instead of feeling like everything was neutral and flat, I started to feel like wait, this is what happy feels like. This is what excitement feels like again. I was missing that for a few years. I started to get rid of some fungal issues, like so many different things, and it was so rapid. So that I think because it was so fast, it really motivated me to keep going. So that's how I started, and I feel like 2025 was my complete transformative year because of that.
That's great. I love how using your own struggles, as a jumping off point to learn more. And now you're using your struggles and what you've learned through your own experience to help other people. And I think so many of the great practitioners, so many of the great people out there that are working to help people that are struggling through health issues, they've got their own story, whether it's themselves or with a family member. I know with our family, my wife struggled with chronic Lyme, Epstein-Barr virus, mold, and other things as well, and it was hard. It was really, really difficult. But through that, we've learned so much. We've sought to continue learning, and now we're using what we've been learning to help other people struggling with the same thing. And I think it's so beautiful whenever practitioners have used their own struggles to bless others. And thank you for your work, and thank you for what you're doing, and an excellent job of taking something that was hard and negative and turning it into something great and beautiful, and something that can blossom and help others. Speaking of blossom, you've got your own framework called Bloom,
hmm
and this framework that you use, it helps families move past picky eating. Can you give us an overview of your Bloom framework and how it works and what you use it with?
Yeah, absolutely. So Bloom, I like to think of Bloom. I came up with the acronym because it makes me think of a picky eater who is then able to bloom and explore food and start to get healthier. And it's just such a cool acronym. But what it stands for is B is biology. So that is essentially your balanced health. You're looking at your nutritional deficiencies. You're looking at health in general, looking at any kind of medical history of the child. Are they struggling with maybe constipation, or if they're struggling anything kind of in their health? So you want to look at that when you are looking at a picky eater versus just focusing on the food that they're eating. You're focusing on the child. So you start with the balanced health. Then you look at their learned oral motor skills or learned oral skills in general, as well as swallowing, making sure that they can chew food appropriately, that they're not pocketing food, that they're managing different textures, that there is not too many sensory sensitivities and things like that. And also, they're swallowing food safely, because if anything is off in any of these areas of bloom, that's when picky eating can start. Optimal microbiome is the first O. So we were looking at the gut health, the gut brain connection. We're looking at cravings and mood and constipation, and bowel movements and things like that, making sure that they don't have a leaky gut, that they're not really struggling there. Because, as I said in my personal story, my microbiome was in desperate need of a revamp. So that happens to a lot of kids. There's just so much toxicity in our environment right now that kids are struggling and their gut is suffering. And a lot of things can really disrupt the gut. It could be the antibiotic use, it could be glyphosate exposure, which is unfortunately sprayed on a lot of our foods. It could be non-native electromagnetic fields, right? The Wi-Fi, and so many different things that we're unfortunately around every single day. So because of that, our kids are struggling and their gut is suffering. So that can also end up or cause picky eating. The second O is open exploration. So making sure that the child feels safe to explore foods and that their nervous system is feeling kind of regulated. It's not in this constant fight or flight around the table,
Mhm.
because I think that's really important for kids to feel safe and to be able to explore food in this way. But also we need to have boundaries. So M is mealtime boundaries. So this is where the structure comes in. This is when we set some rules at the table, because kids really need that. They need structure. They need to know what their expectations are. Boundaries that feel safe.
Sorry. I totally agree. I totally agree.
Okay,
Go ahead. I'm
okay,
sorry.
good. I was like, "Can you hear me?" So, yes. So, boundaries should, definitely be always set for our kids because they need that type of routine, and I think they need to know what is expected of them. So, that's kind of my framework. I feel like I said that very chaotically, but I hope that it was clear, and if you have any questions, please let me know.
Hey, friends, if you're dealing with Lyme, chronic fatigue, or ongoing health struggles, and you feel stuck no matter what you try, we want to invite you to something special.
We're hosting a free live training where we break down why so many moms stay stuck and what actually has to change in your body for healing to begin.
This is the same terrain based approach that helped Ginger go from exhausted and overwhelmed.
To having energy again and living fully with our family.
If that sounds like what you've been looking for, just scroll down and grab the registration link in the episode description.
We'd love to see you there.
Well, first of all, I think it's a great framework. I couldn't agree more
Yeah.
with the things that you said. I loved how you talked about mealtime boundaries and setting expectations. I think so many parents out there almost have this guilt of like, oh, well, I don't want to put too many rules and like put too many expectations on poor little Johnny or poor little Sally or whatever, because I don't want them to feel trapped or like they can. No, 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 no. It's the exact opposite. Having
Exactly.
those boundaries that actually tells them, okay, here's the line and here's the line. And now I have freedom to go between, these lines. And it actually opens them up to more freedom. Kids love boundaries and
Mhm.
they flourish and thrive when they have, those expectations set and those boundaries set. And it's an amazing thing. So I
Yeah.
love also how you pointed out it's not just about the food itself. There's so many things, the environment, the light management you even talked about. There's
Mhm.
so many EMF, chemicals and toxicities that could be involved. And so picky eating is not just about behavior. This is
Mhm.
a multifactorial issue and it needs to be addressed like that. So I
Yeah.
love how you have addressed all of those things with this framework.
I like to say that picky eating is a symptom, not a diagnosis. It's a symptom of something else going on in the body, and we need just to figure out what it is to help
That's an
them.
excellent way to think of it. It's a symptom and it's pointing to, yeah, there's something else going on. So let's go through those just a little bit more. Let's
Mhm.
go back to the B. I think you said it was biology. What
Mhm.
are some ways or what are some things that parents alone could look at to see if there's anything in that realm of that first B that you talked about?
Yeah, well, you can look for different symptoms, right? Are they constipated? Are they in pain after they're eating? Are they having an allergic reaction after having eggs that is really disruptive to them? Are they having any type of symptoms that are kind of medically worrisome? But that doesn't mean necessarily where you need to rush off to a hospital, but it's showing some kind of discomfort in the body, right? So those are the things you want to look at. If something's irregular, if something is just not normal, not what you would expect, then, and it depends on the age, right? Like depending on whether they're a toddler, whether they're an adult or a teenager, there could be different symptoms, but you'll kind of know. And I feel like moms with their intuition, they're able to tell like something's off with my child. And if you're noticing it for more than multiple days and you're noticing that because ever since Susie got sick or ever since Susie started to show this symptom of whatever it was, she's becoming a little bit more picky and she's just not really eating. If it's affecting their appetite or causing any type of stress, then this is something I definitely would consult with a doctor.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
looking at the L there, you talked about looking at the mouth itself. Are there ways that parents could kind of become aware or recognize signs and symptoms showing up there? Or is this something we have to go to a dentist, we have to go to like some oral facial person or something like that?
Yeah. So a speech pathologist is usually a person who can help if they're struggling in that area, or sometimes occupational therapist as well. But it could be so many different professionals, right? You said an airway dentist if it's like a breathing issue. There could be a lot of different things or a palatal issue, right? But yeah, there's definitely signs they can look for. So if they're, for example, holding food for a while, they're pocketing food. Let's say they were eating something for dinner and you're going to brush their teeth, and all of a sudden there's a piece of meat in their cheek. Struggling with that. Maybe they cannot really chew it really well because meat can be a little bit difficult to chew sometimes depending on the type and the texture, but meat is definitely one of the harder ones. If they are gagging or choking, right? That's a sign maybe they're not chewing thoroughly. If they are chewing for a very long time, if they're chewing a bite for a few minutes, that is usually concerning. And usually like 5 or 10 minutes later, you're still sitting at the table and they're still chewing their piece of steak. I would definitely look at that in a way, in a lens where I would start observing like how long are these meals taking? How long does it take them to finish dinner? Because it really a meal should be about 20 minutes hopefully, or maybe 30. Anything over that is a little bit excessive. It kind of shows, and it could be many different things. Maybe they're just not paying attention. Maybe they're running around, which is my son. Like, get him to sit down. It has to be a very preferred snack. Otherwise, it's very hard. Um, so there is many different factors to play into, but if they're sitting down and they're really taking a long time to chew, then I would say that's a red flag.
Yeah, I agree. That definitely can be a red flag. Now, the the first O, looking at the microbiome,
Mm-hmm.
um, what are some ways? I mean, parents, I guess, could do a stool sample or something and mail something off. Maybe you could get a device like a food marble or something and really
Mm-hmm.
check the microbiome. But there's some more obvious ways to see that there's an imbalance there. What are some obvious signs or things that could alert parents to an issue potentially developing?
Yeah, well, one of the main ones, I think, and I know gut is your area, but one of the main ones is cravings, I would say. Honestly, if they're just craving those sugars and carbs all the time, probably it's a sign of an overgrowth, right? That they're feeding the bad guys in in their gut. So that's a big red flag to me that that's their biggest cravings. And it's hard for them to eat anything else. If they don't really like proteins, if they don't really like fats very much, it's just carbs, 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 and sugars and sweets. That's probably one of the biggest ones for me and kids.
Yeah, I think those are such big ones. A parent, I mean, obviously, most of them would know their child's medical history. Maybe a
Mhm.
dad wouldn't, but for parents that do know their kids' medical history, if they've been on any antibiotics at any point, would you then just go ahead and assume, okay, there's probably some microbiome imbalance in there, and
Probably.
maybe, yeah,
Yeah, and also I would want to ask whenever I'm working with a family, like, are they a C-section baby? Are they a vaginal birth? Those things also matter for their microbiome very much. So there is, I think, a lot in the history and how many times, how many rounds of antibiotics, because some kids have had multiples, which it's just so sad because we're just setting them up for their gut not to be developing properly if we do not know how to kind of reseed some of that bacteria, and it is hard to do in today's society, unfortunately.
yeah, it can be. Okay,
Mhm.
move into the second O, if you would. What does the second O stand for again?
Open exploration.
That's it. Open exploration. What are some ways that parents can help kids develop more open exploration in terms of food?
I love this question. There's so many ways. And what I like to really remind parents is that, feeding or eating or getting kind of curious about food starts long before the food is on the plate, right? So there's so many opportunities for them to explore food without the pressure of eating because eating in general is very invasive, right? You're putting something that's not part of you in your body. It requires a lot of things. So, what I like to say is you can start by going to the supermarket and just exploring there in a very safe way, having them explore food, talk about it. You can, depending on the age, you can have conversations or you can make it like a fun game of naming foods, naming different colors, just to get them kind of acquainted to see what does the broccoli look like before it hits my plate, or what does the fruit looks like. Whatever it is that you're trying them to eat, you can explore it that way. If you're lucky enough and you have the space and you can have a garden, you can explore it that way. And I love that too because it's grounding and you're outside, which is just incredible. It has incredible benefits in itself. But just explore in a garden. you can make you know, before even the food hitting the plate, you can even have the child help you prepare it, right? Depending on their age. Even toddlers, they can have plastic knives and they can help you cut it up. They can help you wash the food. They can help you do so many things with it. Um, and it's really fun for them. It's fun for them to observe. And if they're not even there where they don't really want to touch it, they can watch you do it. So have them sit with you at the kitchen island or wherever you're preparing it so they can actually see it. So that's something you can do. And also, what I parents is I mean, I lived in Spain for a little while, so I'm a big fan of tapas and tapa style dinners. So instead of making the plate for your child with the expectation of what they're supposed to eat and the portion that you think they should be eating for dinner, what you can do is have like a tapa style meal. So you have multiple plates of food on the table and the child can serve whatever they want onto their plate, but also they can help serve whatever you want onto your plate. So let's say there's a food there they don't want to try, they don't want to eat. Maybe they can put it onto daddy's plate or whoever's plate. So that's already interacting with it. So there's just so many different ways of interacting with food without pressure that builds curiosity and it really helps the kids to explore. So there are some ideas.
I love that. So many great ideas for involving the kids in the process of from shopping to meal prep to eating. I love
Yeah.
that. Now, let's talk a little bit about setting those boundaries, the M that you had talked about, mealtime boundaries. What's an example of some of the boundaries that parents might set for kids? And then
Yeah.
how do you go about explaining those things and how do you go about implementing those things at mealtime?
Yeah. So, for example, if we're going back to that tapa style table, maybe the expectation is not that the child eats everything from the plate, but maybe the boundary is that you explore everything on the plate. Or maybe the boundary is that you have to sit at that dinner table, even though the smell of something could be a little bothersome to you. Maybe you don't like the look of cauliflower, but you still have to sit at the table with the family. Maybe that could be the boundary. It really depends on the child. It's very child specific of what, depending on what they can tolerate, because we want it to be a healthy boundary where they do have to do something in terms of food that kind of takes them out of their comfort zone, but also doesn't cause them so much stress that they go into this fight or flight. So it's kind of like a balance, but kids love boundaries. They need to know, okay, we're going to be having dinner for 20 minutes. We're going to be sitting here today. These are the plates we're having. And there are so many different boundaries you can set about that. I had a client recently who, what he would do, he was 11. If he didn't like the dinner the mom made, he would get up and he would make himself toast that he really liked. So that was a boundary. Even though you didn't like the dinner, but toast is not an option. It's not an option
Hmm.
for you to make your own. What you can do is, because we went from, the plate where mom just pre-made the plate for everybody, we went to that tapa style dinner and he was able to pick something. And mom always included a safe food. So it wasn't necessarily that everything was overwhelming. There was always a safe food. So, but the boundary was you're not allowed to get up and make yourself toast.
Yeah, that's great. And I mean, we've already talked about it, but I love the idea of having those boundaries. And you're exactly right. Kids like that. They
Hmm.
prefer having those boundaries. Believe it or
Hmm.
not, they
Yeah.
really do. Now, we've talked about some of the signs and symptoms that might go along with picky eating and how to determine maybe if there's an issue there. How do we discover the difference between a behavior problem at the table
Mm.
or like a nervous system or potentially a gut rooted problem when it comes to eating at meal times?
That's a really good question. I think a lot of it is through really knowing your child and observing them, because you're the best person to kind of distinguish that. When you notice these behavioral changes and you notice these patterns that are kind of occurring all the time in terms of their health or in terms of these struggles, those are not going to just kind of resolve on their own. Most of the time. Most of the time, we have to help them to get better, whether it's a microbiome, leaky gut imbalance, whether it's skills that are causing this. Those things are typically not going to resolve on their own unless we change something within their environment or we help them. So, how? In terms of like just behaviors, because we're having a tough morning or we're having like a bad day, that can be because of whatever is happening in their environment and it's only occurring today versus every single day, then maybe that's just a behavior because of whatever was happening today. That could be kind of, I feel like it's just chronic when it comes to these health issues versus behaviors. They kind of resolve themselves after like a day or two, most of the time.
Yeah, yeah, I think that's a really good distinction when it's over and over and every single time. Yeah,
Yeah.
maybe there's something else going on. I know there's many moms who are probably watching this or listening, and they could be dealing with their own chronic illness, either, their own situations, stuff like you've gone through personally, and they're
Hmm.
trying to raise kids and they're trying to deal with picky eaters and eczema and constipation and anxiety. What are some early, we'll call it red flags or early symptoms in the kids that could signal to a parent it's time to look deeper instead of just pushing more bites or trying to force them to eat certain things?
Yeah, that's a really good question because I think there is a lot of this messaging out there, unfortunately, by well meaning friends and even physicians sometimes that is just a phase and they're going to grow out of picky eating. And that can happen for some kids because it is a phase for a lot of toddlers as they're exploring food between that age of like 1.5 to 3. It could happen. But when it's chronic, when it's happening kind of constantly and it's causing that shift in energy in the house, that's when we're kind of in trouble, right? That's when it's disruptive to our routine, when mom is stressed because she has to make extra dinners because she knows, Johnny's not going to eat this. That's really when we get into kind of trouble when it comes to picky eating and we should start to observe. And what I tell all of my families actually, I know it's not part of the bloom, but I also one of the parts of bloom, which I always imagine bloom kind of like a big tree, but at the root of it is connection, right? So really connecting with your child, where you're starting to notice them and you're noticing these patterns and you're noticing that, maybe they're really struggling with this type of food. Maybe they really cannot chew it very well because they're pocketing food. When you're starting to notice these patterns and you're starting to notice behavior around food and you're starting to kind of just connect with them, the magic can really happen. You can start to notice things that nobody else will, and that's going to be like the best clues of how you can start to help them with this picky eating journey.
As you were talking, I was connecting dots to connection. And when you said that, I was literally getting ready to ask, it sounds like one of the best ways to figure out if there is one of these deeper issues going on is to pay attention, is to actually connect and mindfully observe and mindfully connect with your kids, with your family at mealtime, which is a lost art. And I'm talking to myself here as well. I can always do a better job at paying attention to my family. They would be nodding in agreement with that. Yes, you could pay attention to us a little bit.
We could all do it, right? Because we live in
Yeah,
such a disconnected world right now. It's just
absolutely.
constant stimulation of and needing to do things. So I think we could all do it.
Absolutely.
Completely.
Talking about connection, let's focus a little bit on environment because I noticed that you mentioned that as one of the aspects that could be affecting picky eating. So, what are some things to pay attention to in terms of the environment and picky eating? What are some things that we should be focused on?
So many things. Where do I start? Okay. So the environment is uh, it's one of the key pieces that I always work with families on when I work with parents of picky eaters because environment can be either supportive to the child's biology or it could be disruptive to the child's biology, right? And what I mean by that is looking at the chemicals that are present in the home, looking at the air quality, looking at the water that you have in the house, looking at the lighting environment that you have in the house, looking at the sources of non native EMFs, right? So, looking at the Wi Fi, the router, where is it? Is it really close to your child's room? There are so many different things that we can change within our environment that can be very healing to the child's body. And we already know that they're struggling if they're picky eaters. Because again, it's not a diagnosis, it's a symptom of something else happening in their body. So we already know that. So when they're And I love this term of total load, which came from Documenting Hope. I love what they're doing and that foundation, but they talk about the total load of the body of the child, right? Where they just cannot handle because their bucket of whatever the stressors are, it's kind of overflowing. That's when we get into trouble. And it could be picky eating, it could be eczema, it could be asthma, it could be chronic disease, it could be autism, it could be ADHD, so many different things. And our kids are just sicker and sicker. So this is why I think looking at the environment that they're in without overwhelming yourself, because you can do so many things without having to spend thousands of dollars on new stuff for the house, that are simple, that can be really, really helpful to your child's body.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. Everything you talked about is such an important factor. And it's unfortunately, it's something that's not talked about nearly enough. The environment, I'm referring to the environment, it's not talked about nearly enough. So often we're just focused on the food itself, or we're focused on, oh, take this supplement or that supplement. But maybe 90% of the problem is what's going on in their environment. As you mentioned, the air quality, the lighting is
Mhm.
it's one nobody hardly recognizes how much of an impact that can have on hormones, brain health, all
Huge.
kinds of things. It can be huge. And so these
Huge.
are major factors that parents don't need to feel overwhelmed about,
Mhm.
but they're things that can be simply changed a lot of times, and they can make a huge difference without having to spend, like you talked about, thousands and thousands of dollars. Speaking
Yeah.
of environment, give us maybe, if you would, two or three simple things, simple shifts, in terms of environment changes that people can make or parents can make mealtime feel safer and to really help a child's nervous system be more regulated and less overwhelmed.
Yeah. So if you are let's say the meals are happening at the dinner table. You can always look at the lighting that you have there, right? You don't want it to be too bright. You don't want it to be, hopefully, you can change it into some kind of full spectrum light or an incandescent light, or even candlelight. If you don't want to change your light bulbs, that's fine. But you can even light candles because that is just so supportive of our biology in terms of having dinner with this kind of lighting versus like very bright flickering lights, and they don't flicker to to our eyes, but the LEDs, they flicker, so they're very disruptive to our nervous system. So that in itself, just changing the lighting, maybe lighting some candles, which is so fun for kids, that can become part of your routine. We're having dinner together, everybody's sitting down, so we're going to light some candles. Or if you can change the lighting, because and it could be one room at a time or just one lighting fixture at a time if you can. Just changing it to more biology appropriate lighting, such as incandescent lights. Those are usually the cheapest. They're not necessarily the best because there's so many light bulbs right now available in the market that are incredible. However, they're still non-flickering. They're warmer type of light. So they mimic kind of fire a little bit more than the LED light does, and this is what we want because we haven't evolved as a species to be needing this stimulation of lights every single day. So that's definitely one thing. Another thing that you can do to kind of support your picky eater in the home is, because I forgot your original question, but I'm pretty sure that's what we need to talk about. Okay.
We just talked about in a couple simple shifts that people can make to change the environment.
To
So number
change the
one,
environment.
you talked about lighting, and I think that's a huge one.
Lighting is a
Um,
huge one. Also,
yeah.
I think air quality is so important. So if you can, if it's not too cold, if it's not raining, just airing out your house for just 10 minutes a day. It could be room by room, or even just prioritizing the room where you're eating, where you're spending majority of your day, and your child's bedroom, so that you let in some good quality air, let out some of the dusty air, some of the moldy air, because unfortunately mold gets in. So that's something we definitely need to be mindful of. Also, making sure that if they're having dinner, you're giving them good quality water. So, water is another thing that we need to look at so that it's not full of pesticides and chemicals, so that it's filtered and also hopefully mineralized. So, it's really good quality water.
Yeah, absolutely. I just did an interview with a lady a few days ago and talking about water quality, but there's tens of thousands of chemicals potentially in your water, but there's only about 93 or so that are actually tested for. So the majority of things that are possibly in your water are never tested for. So that's a very
Uh,
scary thing. Yeah,
yeah.
some to consider for sure. So
Yeah.
thinking about environment, oh, I love that. Opening up windows and just airing an area out to get improve air
Mhm.
quality, improving, the quality of water that you're getting, and also
Yeah.
improving the lighting. And those shifts don't have to break the bank. They're super simple, they're super easy, and they can make a huge, huge difference.
Yeah.
Um, Looking more at the food aspect, so many moms out there are just struggling to keep it all together, and they're feeling so exhausted, and then they feel exhausted by the idea of trying to cook these, you know, healthy, elaborate meals. What do you think are some simple strategies that moms could nourish the kids in a way that's supporting gut health, supporting brain health, but aren't too difficult?
I love how you bring this up because I was just thinking, I haven't talked about food, and that's like a pretty big deal when it comes to picky eating.
A little bit of a
Um,
big deal, yeah.
yeah, it's a little bit of a big deal. So there is many different things you can do. It kind of depends on the age and it depends on the child and what they're capable of eating, what they're willing to eat. But I always look at food chaining. I love to food chain with my families. And what that means is that we take one type of food and we kind of turn it into another type of food that is more desirable and healthier for them. So, for example, that could be a dino chicken nugget, right? That is unfortunately not very good, but is very predictable. And a lot of our picky eaters like that. And turning that into like a chicken cutlet that you made at home with good quality breadcrumbs, with egg and really good quality chicken, right? So we usually go step by step when it comes to that. So maybe before we get to that beautiful chicken that you make at home, you can start by slowly introducing them to a different type of chicken nugget. Maybe first it's going to be the same brand but a different shape. And maybe then, or maybe it's the same shape but a different brand. And then maybe we'll take them to like an organic kind of chicken nugget. And maybe then we're going to take them to a store bought chicken finger. And maybe then we're going to try and bake a chicken or fry a chicken that's very similar to that. And maybe then we're going to move them to that chicken that you make at home with really good quality ingredients. It really depends on the child and what they can tolerate. But I always think about these different food chaining processes of how we can slowly but surely, in a way that feels not so stressful to the child, change these foods into something better to have better quality ingredients or just better food in general. So that's one thing that I always talk about. And you can do that with any type of food. It can be, I don't know, going from like a really bad quality peanut butter and jelly with white Wonder Bread and Jif peanut butter to like to a sourdough sandwich with like homemade jam and peanut butter. You got to think about these things in that way because I think you can make a lot of progress when you shift slowly but in the right direction. Right? Without changing everything at once, because that's when kids usually shut down and they're like, absolutely not, I'm not trying this. Versus if we go slowly, and if they're old enough, and typically even like 3-year-olds, depending on the child and their developmental status, if they have any kind of cognitive issues, but they can understand when you're having a conversation with them and you say, listen, we're slowly shifting because of X, Y, and Z. We're slowly going to try this because this is good for your gut. This is good for your belly. It's totally appropriate to have these conversations with the child so that, because I really don't want you to have to struggle in the bathroom anymore. I really want you to be able to go to the bathroom every day, if they're constipated or something. There is a lot of reasons behind it. And if you connect with your child, step back and you really observe, you can really get on their level and connect and see what is that level of connection that you can really rely on, and what are some things that you can connect with them on. For example, my son, he loves hugs. So we're slowly, if he's having a hard time, I will definitely want to make sure before we get to the table, if I know it's going to be a meal that's going to stress him out, I'm going to get on his level. We're going to have some hugs. We're going to talk. We're going to have this moment of connection. We're going to play with his trucks. And then maybe then we go to the table, right? So that we can really have him in this parasympathetic, in this rest and digest mode before he goes to eat.
Yeah, those are some powerful strategies, and I love how you're talking about just slow changes. You don't have to go from, you know, Doritos to kale overnight. You can make these slow little transitions, slow little switches
Yeah.
and swaps over time, and doing it in an intentional way. It'll be a lot easier, a lot simpler. You're not going to have the big fights, and so I love that. I think
Yeah.
that so many moms out there carry guilt about past food choices, like things that they had, you know, been feeding their kids for so long because it felt quick and easy. From your own work with families and your own story, what encouragement or what perspective would you share with a mom who may have that, that guilt for things that they have been feeding their family, feeding their kids, and how could you help them to kind of release that as they move forward?
I know. I still carry some guilt around that because when I was struggling with my own health, it was so hard to also carry for my whole family, you know? So I just, I just encourage you to let it go because no matter what it was, no matter what it was that you think was such a bad choice, whatever it was, like you did feed your child. They're here, they're happy, they're thriving, they're growing, right? Because we want our children to be able to thrive in that way where they're growing, they're learning, they're progressing in any way, and your child, I'm sure, is thriving. So that's totally fine. We can always change what choices we make with food moving forward in a way that is not so stressful to the whole family and also not stressful to the mom. Because if mom needs to learn 10 new recipes overnight, like that's a lot, right? Or start to completely changed her pantry, completely changed her grocery list. That's a lot of planning. So it doesn't have to feel that way. It could be little small changes as you go along so that you are a little bit more intentional. You can still pick up the chips, but maybe instead of picking up the chips that are full of chemicals, you read the ingredients and see. Maybe you'll get the ones that are just potatoes and salt and olive oil or whatever it is. So it's just being intentional, becoming kind of like a food detective so that you learn what the ingredients mean in the back of the boxes. And if there's anything there that you don't know what it is and you don't have it in your kitchen, it's probably not good for you. So it's just little things like that where it's totally okay to make these choices when you're feeling rushed or go to a drive-through because at the end of the day, if this is helping you survive as a mom and is helping you feed your family and your child is fed, I think that's the best that we can do right now. And then slowly but surely maybe change our choices because if we do have a picky eater and they're struggling in that way, probably they need a little bit of extra support when it comes to food. And now that we know that, we can do that moving forward.
Absolutely. I love it. So, do you have any resources or any ways that parents that may want some more information or may want some ideas on how to address these picky eaters at home? Do you have any ways that parents could do that and connect with you?
Yeah, definitely. I have a bunch of free resources on my website at lenalivinsky.com. So you can definitely go there. I think there is a tab there that says start here. So you can do that. I also have a quiz for a root cause quiz that it's very quick. It's like 2, 3 minutes and it will tell you exactly kind of which area of the Bloom framework stands out. Oftentimes it's multiples, but it will give you an idea of where you can start, right? Whether you need to focus more on connection, whether you need to focus more on their biology, their health, whether you need to focus more on the gut microbiome, that's going to give you an idea of where you can start with your child. So I like that quiz for that reason. I also have a master class there that kind of talks a little bit about Bloom and some things they can do at home. So that's free on my website as well. And I can always, if anybody wanted to connect with me, we can have a strategy call to see if maybe they're having a really hard time and they want to work with me. We can get to know each other that way because I always want to meet with the family before to make sure we are a match and then kind of go from there.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining me today and coming on the podcast. I will put links to Lena's website, to some of her resources. She's got some great resources, as she mentioned. I'll put links below this podcast episode. So if you're listening on audio, it's going to be in the description below this episode. You'll find her links. I'll also put it in the YouTube description as well. You'll find links to Lena and her website and her connections there. Thank you so much, Lena. Do you have any parting words of
Thank
wisdom for
you.
moms out there that are dealing with picky eaters? Any hope for them?
Oh, so much hope. You can honestly, little changes at home where you start with connection. If anything else fails, just start with connecting with your child and start to observe them, start to spend a little bit of extra time with them before they're eating, and start to really notice where they're struggling. And you're going to start to put things together that you haven't seen before, and things are going to clarify and things are going to get better. They always do. It's just taking a step back sometimes. We're so in it and we're so rushing and we're so stressed out that sometimes it's just taking a step back, connecting, and that can be a really beautiful starting point for you.
Yeah, I'm going to start tonight by staring at my kids while they're eating and see how they respond.
I'm sure they're gonna love it. They're gonna
They're
love
going
it.
to love it. They're
It's
going
gonna
to
be
love
great.
it. Thank you again for joining
Thank
me, and
thank you for
hopefully we
having
can
me.
maybe connect sometime in the future.
I would love that. Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in to the Discover Health podcast. Remember, your health is a journey, not a destination. Keep exploring, and we'll see you next week.